Imagine, if you will, a scene ripped from the very fabric of nightmare. A kingdom bathed in the golden hues of late afternoon, unaware of the impending horror. A palace, opulent and gleaming, soon to be draped in the chilling shroud of death. And at its heart, a queen, Semiramis, not merely a ruler, but a force of nature, poised to unleash a meticulously crafted terror upon her unsuspecting realm. Yes, forget the sanitized tales of history, the dry dates and bloodless accounts. Tonight, we delve into the crimson heart of legend, into the very moment where a queen became something else. Something far darker than history dares to record, something that continues to echo through the ages in whispers and forgotten texts. The sun, a molten disk sinking below the ziggurats of Babylon, cast long skeletal shadows across the city, shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a premonition of the night to come. Within the palace walls, 100 young men, hand-picked for their beauty, strength, and naivete, prepared for what they believed was the ultimate honor. A single night with Queen Semiramis. Little did they know the honor was a gilded cage, the night a journey to oblivion, and the queen a predator cloaked in silk and jewels. Their laughter echoed through the halls, a tragic symphony of youthful exuberance soon to be silenced by a horror they couldn't possibly comprehend. They were the chosen, the beautiful, the sacrifices, each a lamb led to a slaughter orchestrated with chilling precision. The air itself crackled with anticipation, heavy with the scent of imported myrrh and rare spices. Perfumes designed not to entice, but to mask the metallic tang of fear that would soon permeate the royal bedchamber. Outside, the city bustled with its usual evening activities. Merchants hawked their wares, children played in the dusty streets, lovers whispered sweet nothings under the watchful gaze of the moon, all oblivious to the dark ritual about to unfold within the palace walls. They lived in ignorance, blissfully unaware that their queen, their protector, was preparing to unleash a supernatural plague upon their city, a plague that would stain their dreams and poison their very existence. For tonight, Babylon was not merely a city, it was an altar, and its queen, a priestess performing a blasphemous rite. The young men, oblivious to their impending doom, luxuriated in the decadent atmosphere. They bathed in oils infused with herbs whose properties they could not fathom, oils designed to relax their bodies, to dull their minds, to render them passive and compliant. They dined on delicacies flown in from across the empire, foods chosen not for their nutritional value, but for their supposed spiritual purity. They were pampered, prepped, and primed for their role in a drama far grander and far more terrifying than anything they could imagine. They believed they were being elevated. They were, in reality, being hollowed out, emptied of their life force, prepared as vessels for a power beyond human comprehension. The finest linen swathed their bodies, jewels adorned their necks, but these were not symbols of honor. They were the trappings of sacrifice, the gaudy decorations on a funeral pyre. Semiramis, meanwhile, moved through the palace like a phantom, her presence both alluring and terrifying. Her eyes, usually pools of warm honey, now gleamed with an unsettling intensity, reflecting a cold, calculating ambition. She had spent months, years even, meticulously planning this night, poring over ancient texts, consulting with forbidden scholars, and mastering rituals that chilled even the most hardened sorcerers. She was not merely a queen, but a scholar of the arcane, a master manipulator of both the earthly and the ethereal realms. Her hands, adorned with rings of unimaginable value, trembled slightly, not with fear, but with a barely suppressed hunger for the power that awaited her. She was on the precipice of transformation, poised to shed her mortal coil and ascend to something more. Her bedchamber, usually a haven of comfort and beauty, had been transformed into a temple of dread. The silken tapestries had been replaced with obsidian panels etched with symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The air hung heavy with the cloying scent of incense, masking the metallic tang of fear that would soon permeate the royal bedchamber. Outside, the city bustled with its usual evening activities. Merchants hawked their wares, children played in the dusty streets, lovers whispered sweet nothings under the watchful gaze of the moon, all oblivious to the dark ritual about to unfold within the palace walls. They lived in ignorance, blissfully unaware that their queen, their protector, was preparing to unleash a supernatural plague upon their city, a plague that would stain their dreams and poison their very existence. For tonight, Babylon was not merely a city, it was an altar, and its queen, a priestess performing a blasphemous rite. The young men, oblivious to their impending doom, luxuriated in the decadent atmosphere. They bathed in oils infused with herbs whose properties they could not fathom, oils designed to relax their bodies, to dull their minds, to render them passive and compliant. They dined on delicacies flown in from across the empire, foods chosen not for their nutritional value, but for their supposed spiritual purity. They were pampered, prepped, and primed for their role in a drama fama farandar and far more terrifying than anything they could imagine. They believed they were being elevated. They were, in reality, being hollowed out, emptied of their life force, prepared as vessels for a power beyond human comprehension. The finest linen swathed their bodies, jewels adorned their necks, but these were not symbols of honor. They were the trappings of sacrifice, the gaudy decorations on a funeral pyre. Semiramis, meanwhile, moved through the palace like a phantom, her presence both alluring and terrifying. Her eyes, usually pools of warm honey, now gleamed with an unsettling intensity, reflecting a cold, calculating ambition. She had spent months, years even, meticulously planning this night, poring over ancient texts, consulting with forbidden scholars, and mastering rituals that chilled even the most hardened sorcerers. She was not merely a queen, but a scholar of the arcane, a master manipulator of both the earthly and the ethereal realms. Her hands, adorned with rings of unimaginable vanity, trembled slightly, not with fear, but with a barely suppressed hunger for the power that awaited her. She was on the precipice of transformation, poised to shed her mortal coil and ascend to something more. Her bedchamber, usually a haven of comfort and beauty, had been transformed into a temple of dread. The silken tapestries had been replaced with obsidian panels etched with symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The air hung heavy with the cloying scent of incense, masking the metallic tang of anticipation. In the center of the room stood an altar crafted from a single block of black granite, radiating a palpable aura of power. This was not a place of love, but a crucible of transformation, a space where the boundaries between the mortal and the divine would be shattered with brutal force. The very architecture seemed to whisper, the shadows danced with unseen entities, and the air vibrated with a power that threatened to overwhelm the senses. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the horizon, Semiramis donned her ceremonial robes, garments of shimmering black silk adorned with intricate embroidery depicting scenes of ancient gods and forgotten rituals. She moved with a grace that was both mesmerizing and unsettling, her movements fluid and predatory. She was no longer merely a woman, but a vessel, a conduit for a power that threatened to consume her from within. Her reflection in the polished obsidian panels seemed to flicker and distort, revealing glimpses of something inhuman lurking beneath the surface. The queen was fading, and something far more terrifying was taking her place. The first young man was led into the chamber at sunset. He was young, barely a man, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. He had been chosen for his exceptional beauty, his flawless physique, and his utter lack of knowledge. He believed he was about to experience the pinnacle of earthly pleasure. He was, in reality, stepping into the jaws of a cosmic beast. Semiramis greeted him with a smile that did not reach her eyes, a smile that promised delight but delivered only death. She spoke to him in a voice that was both soothing and hypnotic, lulling him into a state of blissful oblivion. He was a moth drawn to a deadly flame, a sacrifice willingly offering himself to a monstrous deity. The ritual began with a series of chants spoken in a language that predated human civilization, words that resonated with a power that shook the very foundations of the palace. Semiramis moved with practiced precision, her movements guided by forces beyond her control. She was no longer the master of her own destiny, but a puppet dancing to the tune of ancient gods. The young man, now completely entranced, knelt before the altar, his eyes glazed over with a look of ecstatic surrender. He was ready, willing. As the night progressed, the chamber became a charnel house. One by one, the young men were led to their doom, their life force drained, their bodies discarded like empty shells. Semiramis, fueled by their stolen energy, grew stronger, more powerful, more inhuman. Her eyes gleamed with an unholy light, her skin shimmered with an ethereal glow, and her movements became fluid and unnatural. She was no longer merely a queen, but a goddess of death, a harbinger of cosmic horror. The chamber itself seemed to breathe with a dark energy, the obsidian panels pulsing with a malevolent light, the altar stained crimson with the blood of innocents. Outside the palace walls, the city began to feel the effects of the ritual. Animals grew restless, plants withered, and a palpable sense of dread permeated the air. The very fabric of reality seemed to unravel, revealing glimpses of a world beyond human comprehension. Babylon was being transformed, corrupted by the dark magic unleashed within the palace walls. The queen's ambition had unleashed a plague upon her city, a plague that would forever stain its history. As dawn approached, Semiramis stood amidst the corpses of her victims, her body radiating an unholy light. She had achieved her goal. She had transcended her mortal limitations. She had become something more. But at what cost? The city was dying, her subjects were terrified, and her soul was forever stained with the blood of innocence. She had gained unimaginable power, but she had lost her humanity in the process. She was now a monster, a queen of shadows, forever bound to the dark magic that had transformed her. The sun rose, casting its light upon a city teetering on the brink of destruction. The palace stood silent, a monument to ambition and horror. And within its walls, a queen, forever changed, forever bound to the crimson bedchamber where she had sacrificed her humanity for a taste of forbidden power. The legend of Semiramis had begun, a legend that would echo through the ages, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks within the human heart and the price of ambition without restraint. The echoes of the screams, they linger still. The morning after the ritual dawned not with triumphant fanfare, but with a chilling stillness. A silence broken only by the panicked whispers of palace servants and the distant, mournful howls of dogs fleeing the city. The sun, usually a welcome sight, cast a harsh, unforgiving light upon the scene, revealing the horrifying reality of Semiramis's transformation. The queen was no longer merely a ruler, but a walking nightmare, a being whose very presence corrupted the air and warped the senses. And Babylon, once the jewel of the ancient world, was now a city teetering on the precipice of oblivion, haunted by the ghosts of the sacrificed and choked by the oppressive weight of the queen's newfound power. The guards who first entered the crimson bedchamber stumbled back in terror, their breakfast threatening to reappear. The air hung thick with the stench of blood and decay, a sickening sweetness that clung to the back of the throat. The sight that greeted them was enough to shatter the sanity of even the most hardened warrior. 99 corpses, arranged in a perfect spiral pattern, their eyes wide with the horror of their final moments, their life force completely extinguished. And in the center of this macabre tableau, Semiramis sat upon the altar, her eyes gleaming with an unholy light,
her face an unsettling mask of inhuman beauty. They had entered expecting to serve their queen. They found a goddess of death. Her voice, when she finally spoke, sent shivers down their spines. It was no longer the melodious voice they had known, but a chilling symphony of harmonic resonance, a sound that bypassed their ears and resonated directly within their minds. She spoke in commands, not requests, each syllable laced with a power that stripped away their free will, leaving them mere puppets dancing to her tune. She ordered them to clean the chamber, to dispose of the bodies, to erase all traces of the night's events. And they obeyed, their bodies moving against their will, their minds screaming in protest, their souls slowly being consumed by the queen's insatiable hunger. The palace itself seemed to bend to her will. Shadows stretched and writhed, mimicking her movements, forming grotesque shapes that danced along the walls. The temperature fluctuated wildly, creating pockets of icy cold that clung to the bones. Whispers echoed through the halls, voices speaking in languages that no one recognized, voices that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves. The palace was no longer merely a building, but an extension of Semiramis's will, a manifestation of her growing power, a living testament to her descent into madness. Semiramis, meanwhile, began to exhibit a range of disturbing new abilities. She ceased eating normal food, subsisting instead on what the palace records vaguely described as ethereal sustenance. Her eyes became painful to look at directly, radiating a light that caused physical discomfort. Her skin took on a subtle luminescence, visible even in darkened rooms, and her movements became unnaturally fluid, as if she were unbound by the laws of physics. She was no longer merely human, but something other, a being of immense power, but also of immense instability, caught between the mortal and the divine. The court physician, Nabu Sharma, meticulously documented these changes on clay tablets, his handwriting growing increasingly frantic as he struggled to reconcile the queen's condition with his understanding of medicine. He recorded her unnatural resilience, her ability to heal from wounds that would have killed a normal person, her resistance to disease, and her immunity to poison. He also noted her growing detachment from reality, her tendency to speak in tongues, her obsession with ancient rituals, and her increasing reliance on forbidden knowledge. He was a scientist witnessing a miracle, or perhaps a catastrophe, unfolding before his very eyes. The city, too, began to suffer the consequences of Semiramis's transformation. Animals fled in droves, abandoning their homes and their owners. Plants withered and died, their leaves turning to dust. The Euphrates River, the lifeblood of Babylon, began to flow backwards, carrying with it strange and unnatural things. And the ghosts of the sacrificed, their eyes filled with accusatory sorrow, began to haunt the streets, their silent presence a constant reminder of the queen's crimes. Babylon was being poisoned, not by disease, but by the dark magic that now emanated from its ruler. The whispers of dissent began to spread, carried on the wind like seeds of rebellion. Rumors of the queen's transformation, of the sacrifices, of the unnatural phenomena plaguing the city began to circulate among the populace. Fear turned to anger, anger to resentment, and resentment to a burning desire for change. The people of Babylon, once loyal subjects, were now questioning their queen, questioning her authority, questioning her very right to rule. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, and the harvest was fast approaching. Semiramis, however, was not blind to the growing unrest. She had eyes and ears everywhere, her spies infiltrating every corner of the city, her voice of command silencing any hint of open defiance. She tightened her grip on power, increasing the palace guard, imposing stricter curfews, and cracking down on any form of dissent. She was a tyrant, ruling through fear and intimidation, crushing any opposition with ruthless efficiency. She had transformed herself into a goddess, but she had also become a monster, feared and hated by her own people.
But even her iron grip could not contain the supernatural phenomena that were now plaguing the city. The ghosts grew bolder, their apparitions becoming more frequent and more vivid. The shadows grew darker,
their movements more erratic and more menacing. The whispers grew louder, their voices more insistent and more accusatory. Babylon was being haunted not by mere spirits, but by the collective trauma of its own sins, by the dark legacy of Semiramis's ambition. The priests of Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon, grew increasingly concerned. The temples were being desecrated, the sacred rituals disrupted, and the very fabric of the cosmos threatened. They saw Semiramis not as a goddess, but as an abomination, a being whose existence threatened the balance of the universe. They knew that something had to be done, that the queen had to be stopped. But how could they challenge a being who wielded such immense power, a being who seemed to defy the very laws of nature? The high priest, a man of unwavering faith and profound wisdom, began to gather his allies. Priests from other temples, scholars of the arcane, and even foreign sorcerers, all united by a common goal: to rid Babylon of the evil that had taken root in the heart of its queen. They met in secret, cloaked in shadows, whispering ancient incantations and poring over forbidden texts, searching for a way to break Semiramis's power, to restore balance to the city, and to save Babylon from the darkness that threatened to consume it whole. They were David facing Goliath, a small band of believers standing against a seemingly insurmountable evil. Their plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They would confront Semiramis not with weapons or armies, but with the power of their faith, with the strength of their convictions, and with the combined knowledge of their ancient traditions. They would challenge her claim to divinity, expose her crimes against humanity, and attempt to sever her connection to the dark magic that fueled her power. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to save their city, but they knew that if they failed, Babylon would be doomed. As the priests prepared for their confrontation, Semiramis grew increasingly paranoid. She sensed their gathering power, their growing resistance, and she knew that they posed a threat to her rule. She intensified her surveillance, tightening her grip on the city, and unleashing her shadows to hunt down any hint of dissent. She was a cornered animal, lashing out in fear and desperation, her humanity completely consumed by her hunger for power. The stage was set for a final confrontation, a battle between the forces of light and darkness, between the priests of Marduk and the Queen of Shadows. Babylon held its breath, waiting for the storm to break, its fate hanging in the balance. The echoes of the sacrifices, the whispers of the ghosts, and the chilling command of the queen filled the air, a symphony of dread that heralded the coming apocalypse. The dawn of a new era was approaching, an era that would be defined by the choices they made, by the battles they fought, and by the sacrifices they were willing to make to save their city and their souls. The air within the great ziggurat of Marduk crackled with a palpable tension, thick with the incense of centuries and the barely suppressed fear of those gathered within its sacred walls. This was no ordinary assembly. This was a clandestine convocation of spiritual leaders, a daring act of defiance against a queen who claimed dominion over both the earthly and the divine. The very stones seemed to hold their breath, awaiting the arrival of Semiramis, the accused, the monster, the mother whose ambition had damned a city. The high priest of Marduk, a gaunt figure with eyes that burned with righteous fire, stood before the assembled priests, his voice resonating with a quiet strength that belied the fear gnawing at his soul. He spoke of the queen's transformation, of the sacrifices, of the supernatural plague that was consuming Babylon, his words painting a horrifying portrait of a city teetering on the brink of cosmic collapse. He declared that Semiramis had not ascended to divinity, but had become an abomination, a being whose very existence threatened the balance of the universe. He called for justice, not for revenge, but for the salvation of Babylon and the restoration of cosmic order. The foreign priests smuggled into the city under the cover of darkness added their voices to the chorus of condemnation. Egyptian priests of Thoth spoke of the desecration of sacred knowledge. Hittite shamans warned of the disruption of elemental forces, and even mysterious figures from the Indus Valley whispered of the karmic consequences of such unspeakable acts. They represented a united front,
a coalition of spiritual powers, all determined to stand against the darkness that had enveloped Babylon. They knew the risks, they understood the potential consequences, but they were driven by a higher purpose, a belief that some evils simply could not be allowed to stand. The preparations for the trial were elaborate and painstaking. Divine wards were erected, crafted from sacred salt, meteoric iron, and the blood of willing sacrifices, creating layers of protection against Semiramis's supernatural powers. Ancient incantations were chanted, their vibrations weaving a web of spiritual energy that would bind the queen and prevent her from unleashing her full power. The very architecture of the ziggurat was imbued with protective symbols, transforming the sacred space into a fortress against the forces of darkness. They were preparing for war, not a war of steel and blood, but a war of souls, a battle for the very fabric of reality. The summons was delivered, not by messengers, but by the queen's own son, Adad-nirari, manipulated by the priests through subtle suggestion and carefully crafted illusions. The priests knew that Semiramis's only weakness was her love for her son, her unwavering devotion to his well-being. They exploited this weakness, using Adad-nirari as a pawn in their desperate game, knowing that he was the only one who could compel her to attend the trial. It was a cruel act, a violation of maternal trust, but they believed that the fate of Babylon justified such drastic measures. As Semiramis entered the ziggurat, a wave of palpable energy washed over the assembled priests. The temperature plummeted, shadows danced, and the air crackled with electricity. Her presence was a physical force, a manifestation of her immense power, a testament to her transformation. She moved with an unnerving grace, her eyes gleaming with an unholy light, her face a mask of cold indifference. She surveyed the scene with a dismissive gaze, as if she were merely an amused observer at a trivial spectacle. She underestimated her opponents. She failed to grasp the depth of their faith, the strength of their convictions, and the power of their combined will. The trial began with a formal reading of the charges, the words echoing through the ziggurat like a thunderclap. Semiramis was accused of crimes against humanity, crimes against divinity, and crimes against the very fabric of reality. She was accused of mass murder, of soul consumption, of cosmic corruption, of violating the ancient laws that governed the universe. The accusations were damning, the evidence overwhelming, but Semiramis remained unfazed, her expression unchanging, her silence more terrifying than any denial.
The survivor of the ritual, hidden away in the temple crypts, was brought forth to testify. He was a broken man, haunted by the memories of that horrific night, his voice trembling as he recounted the queen's transformation, the sacrifices, and the unspeakable horrors he had witnessed. His testimony was a damning indictment of Semiramis's actions, a stark reminder of the human cost of her ambition. The priests listened intently, their faces grim, their resolve strengthened by the survivor's harrowing tale. Physical evidence was presented: crystallized blood patterns from the ritual chamber, transformed plant matter from the dying gardens, and water from the reversed Euphrates. Each artifact bore witness to the queen's crimes, each telling a silent story of death and destruction. The priests examined the evidence with reverence and dread, recognizing the dark power that permeated each object, the lingering echo of the queen's malevolent presence. But the most compelling evidence came from the metaphysical realm. Priests trained in divination presented oracle bones cracked in patterns that spelled out accusations. Sacred flames burned in colors that indicated cosmic crimes, and disruptions in the spiritual realm were meticulously documented. The very fabric of reality seemed to testify against Semiramis, confirming her guilt in ways that defied human comprehension. The trial was not merely a legal proceeding, it was a cosmic reckoning. Semiramis finally broke her silence, her voice resonating with a power that threatened to shatter the ziggurat. She spoke of her love for her son, of her desire to protect him, of her belief that her actions were justified by the desperate circumstances facing Babylon. She claimed that she had not sought divinity for its own sake, but had been driven by a higher purpose, a need to secure her son's reign and ensure the survival of her kingdom.
She presented herself as a savior, a protector, a mother willing to sacrifice anything for her child. Her words were persuasive, her arguments compelling, and for a moment the priests wavered, their resolve shaken by the force of her conviction. They struggled to reconcile the monster they had accused with the loving mother she claimed to be, the ruthless tyrant with the selfless protector. They questioned their own motives, their own judgment, their own right to condemn a queen who had acted out of love, however twisted and misguided her actions may have been. But the high priest of Marduk, his faith unwavering, stepped forward to challenge her. He spoke of the importance of moral boundaries, of the sanctity of human life, of the cosmic laws that could not be violated, even in the name of love. He argued that Semiramis's actions, however well-intentioned, had unleashed a darkness upon Babylon that threatened to consume it whole. He reminded the priests that true love demands sacrifice, but not at the expense of others' lives, not at the cost of their own souls. The ghosts of the sacrificed, summoned by the priests through ancient rituals, materialized within the ziggurat, their spectral forms filling the sacred space. They stood as silent witnesses, their eyes filled with accusatory sorrow, their presence a constant reminder of the queen's crimes. They were the victims of her ambition, the casualties of her twisted love, the living embodiment of her moral failure. Their presence shattered Semiramis's composure. For the first time since her transformation, she showed a flicker of fear, a glimmer of remorse, a hint of the humanity she had sacrificed for power. The deliberations were long and arduous, the priests wrestling with the moral and theological implications of their decision. They debated whether someone who had partially transcended mortality could be held to mortal law, whether divine authority excused crimes committed in the pursuit of a higher purpose, and whether the ends justified the means, however horrific those means may have been. The fate of Semiramis and the fate of Babylon hung in the balance. Finally, after 3 days of intense debate, the verdict was reached. Semiramis was found guilty of crimes against humanity, crimes against divinity, and crimes against the very fabric of reality. She was condemned to be executed, not by ordinary means, but by sacred fire. A fire that would consume not only her body, but her soul, her memory, and the very possibility of her resurrection. The sentence was harsh, but the priests believed it was necessary to cleanse Babylon of the evil that had taken root in its heart. The great courtyard of Babylon throbbed with a morbid energy, a vast expanse filled with the hushed anticipation of thousands. The air, thick with the scent of incense and fear, vibrated with the collective will of a city demanding justice, demanding an end to the supernatural nightmare that had gripped their lives. Semiramis, bound in chains of shimmering divine light, stood before the pyre, her face a mask of icy composure, her eyes reflecting a chilling mixture of defiance and resignation. The pyre itself was a masterpiece of theological engineering, constructed from 7 types of sacred wood: cedar from Lebanon for purification, sandalwood from India for spirit binding, olive wood soaked in holy oil for divine judgment. The arrangement followed celestial patterns, mirroring the constellations on the night of the queen's transformation, a symbolic attempt to reverse the ritual that had unleashed her dark power. The high priest of Marduk, his voice trembling with emotion, delivered the final condemnation, reciting the charges against Semiramis one last time, reminding the gathered crowd of the horrors she had inflicted upon Babylon. He spoke of the sacrifices, the ghosts, the supernatural plague, and the cosmic imbalance her existence had created. He declared that her execution was not an act of vengeance, but a necessary step towards healing the wounded soul of their city. Semiramis remained silent, her gaze fixed upon the sky, as if searching for a sign from the gods. She offered no apology, no plea for mercy, no expression of remorse. She simply stood there, a queen stripped of her power, a monster brought to justice, a mother facing her final reckoning. Her silence was a testament to her unyielding pride, her unwavering belief in the righteousness of her actions, and her acceptance of the fate that awaited her. The torches were lit, and the sacred fire roared to life, consuming the pyre in a blaze of intense heat and blinding light. The flames danced and writhed, casting grotesque shadows upon the faces of the onlookers, creating an atmosphere of both terror and awe. The heat was intense, the air shimmering with energy, as the fire began its work, consuming the earthly remains of the queen who had dared to challenge the natural order. Semiramis, as the flames engulfed her, finally broke her silence. Her screams, however, were not the cries of a mortal woman, but a symphony of unearthly harmonics, a chilling resonance that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly within the minds of the listeners. Her voice shattered pottery miles away, caused spontaneous abortions in pregnant women, and drove strong men to their knees, their minds reeling from the sheer force of her agony. But worse than the physical effects were the psychic ones. Those who heard her death screams reported understanding them not as words, but as raw meaning, forced directly into their consciousness. She screamed prophecies of doom, cursing bloodlines for generations, revealing cosmic secrets that drove listeners mad, and planting seeds of fear and paranoia that would fester for centuries to come. Her death was not a quiet passing, but a psychic assault, a final act of defiance against those who sought to destroy her.
The fire burned for 3 days and 3 nights, consuming vast quantities of wood and oil, fueled by the queen's immense power and the collective will of the city. The smoke billowed into the sky, a dark plume that seemed to blot out the sun, casting a pall over Babylon, a visible manifestation of the darkness that had been purged from its heart. The flames danced with strange shapes, revealing fleeting glimpses of other worlds, of forgotten gods, and of the countless souls that Semiramis had consumed in her quest for power. When the fire finally died down, the priests approached the pyre with trepidation, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. They expected to find ashes, the remnants of a mortal body consumed by flames. Instead, they found something far more disturbing: the bones of Semiramis, transformed into a crystalline substance, black as obsidian, but transparent as diamond, harder than any known material, and still warm to the touch. The crystalline bones pulsed with a faint inner light, emitting a low hum that resonated within the minds of those who approached them. They whispered constantly, not audibly, but directly into the thoughts of anyone nearby, whispering secrets, prophecies, and promises of power. They were not merely remnants of a dead queen, but seeds of a dark potential, waiting to be awakened, waiting to be nurtured, waiting to unleash their power upon the world once more. The priests attempted to destroy the bones, but their efforts were futile. Throwing them into the Euphrates resulted in them returning to shore, carried by impossible currents. Burying them caused earthquakes and the ground to bleed. Attempts to scatter them saw the pieces reassemble, crawling across miles to reunite. The bones were not merely physical objects, but fragments of a soul, fragments of a will that refused to be extinguished, fragments of a power that transcended death itself. The foreign priests, drawing upon the wisdom of their ancient traditions, finally devised a containment strategy. They created 7 containers from meteoric iron, each inscribed with protective symbols from different religions, designed to bind the fragments of Semiramis' soul and prevent them from reuniting. The crystalline bones were divided among the containers with elaborate rituals, ensuring that no single piece could call to another, that the queen's power would remain fragmented and contained. The 7 containers were then hidden in secret locations, entrusted to loyal guardians, their existence shrouded in mystery and their purpose forgotten by all but a select few. The locations were chosen for their spiritual significance, for their natural defenses, and for their distance from one another, ensuring that the fragments of Semiramis' soul would remain isolated and unable to influence the world. The task was not to destroy her, but to imprison her, to contain her darkness, and to prevent her from ever rising again. Centuries passed, and the memory of Semiramis faded into legend. Her name became synonymous with tyranny, with ambition, and with the dangers of unchecked power. Her story was told and retold, embellished and distorted, until it became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within the human heart. But the truth of her existence, the reality of her transformation, and the location of her crystalline bones remained hidden, guarded by those who understood the true nature of the threat she posed. But the whispers remained, carried on the wind,
echoing through the ages, whispering promises of power to those who would listen. The stories of Semiramis, her transformation, and of the secrets she had unlocked continued to circulate among occult circles, among those who sought to transcend their mortal limitations, to unlock the hidden powers of the universe, and to claim dominion over both the earthly and the divine. The legend of Semiramis was not merely a tale of the past, but a temptation for the future, a siren call to those who dared to tread the path of darkness. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, the 7 containers waited, their protective wards slowly weakening, their contents growing restless, their crystalline bones whispering louder and louder, calling out to those who would seek them, promising them power, promising them knowledge, promising them a glimpse into the abyss. The legend of Semiramis was not over. It was merely dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken, waiting for the right person to unleash her power upon the world once more. The whispers, they never truly cease. The end.